In 2017, we launched Ideas Abu Dhabi in partnership with the Aspen Institute to convene global thinkers to tackle some of the world's challenges. Today, our panel addresses the existential threat of climate change, and we are fortunate to have 4 champions of climate and nature philanthropy who together have played groundbreaking roles. We'll hear about their priorities, the obstacles they face, and how they continue to translate new ideas into action with impact. You all have detailed bios of everyone here, so I'll skip that and go straight to the content. We've just heard from Badr and from Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber about the trillions required annually to tackle the climate crisis. Bill, you're one of the world's leading philanthropists and investors in climate-related causes. What do you think philanthropy can achieve in relation to the climate crisis that business and public finance cannot?
Yeah, it's important to remember that philanthropy is extremely small. It's not half a percent of the world economy, and so it has to play a very specialized role. Particularly if you think about philanthropy, that's money coming from countries that are well off to reduce inequity, to help poor countries. That is extremely limited. Governmental transfers, so-called development assistance transfers, are about 140 billion a year, and philanthropy that goes from the rich countries to help developing countries is only about 40 billion a year. So incredibly modest dollars. And yet those dollars can do some things that are quite unique. In the history of improving the human condition, 2 of the most amazing stories are, first, what was called the Green Revolution, where in the 1960s and 70s, Asia in particular faced malnutrition and starvation because of growing populations. And it was actually Ford and Rockefeller Foundation who funded the seed improvements that more than doubled cereal crop productivity. And so during that time, when people thought there would be a shortage of calories, actually calories per person went up pretty substantially. More recently, in the year 2000, looking at the childhood deaths in the world, which at that time was over 10 million children under the age of 5 dying, the idea that we needed to create new vaccines and fund them for these development countries caused the creation of a thing called Gavi. It was about 80% funded by governments, 20% by philanthropy, and in fact, that's the primary reason that between the year 2000 and 2019, childhood death was cut from that 10 million a year to about 5 million per year. And so it's an amazing thing. If that funding's maintained, there's a clear path before 2040 to cut that in half again and get that down to 2.5%. So philanthropy can play a highly impactful role. We do have to be careful. When dollars are scarce, we have to spend them extremely well. And so, when a government shifts money from category A, like funding vaccines and bed nets, into category B, you have to say is that if it's not additional money, if it's just shifting to the thing that's getting the press conference today, is that really a net benefit? And all of us with philanthropic dollars have to be thoughtful about that. Let me just explain in the breakthrough energy case, the large part of the capital is not philanthropic. The so-called ventures piece that we've raised $2 billion, we're raising another $2 billion. Although it's dual purpose, it's confined to high-impact climate investing, it's pretty clear today that we'll have a good return on that. So it's not drawing down scarce philanthropic dollars. But, I spend about $500 million a year on climate-related philanthropy. And so things like open source grid models, things like funding implementation of climate activities, things like funding policy groups in different parts of the world. Advocacy you could almost put in a special category of its own. You know, will the IRA, which is fundamental to the U.S. leadership in climate, will that be maintained or not? Certainly not clear what will happen there. So, you know, it's great to see more climate philanthropy. You know, some of that will go to things like redoing the green revolution, coming up with a set of seeds, because after all, the people who are actually suffering from climate change in a substantial way are not people in temperate zone, well-off countries. You know, the economic models are pretty clear about, even in a 2 to 3 degree range, what you end up with as not a super big thing. It's the poorer people, like the subsistence farmers, and the R&D to make seeds and help those farmers, that's definitely philanthropic. Vastly underfunded, huge opportunity. So it's some of these R&D advanced ideas where philanthropists will take more risks than governments do and hopefully set a model that as you succeed, showing the delivery, showing the innovation, then you can get market dollars, private sector dollars, and government dollars to come in behind.
Well, that's the perfect segue into the flip side of markets. Ray, you're an expert on markets. You're also a leading philanthropist, having contributed over $6 billion to various philanthropic causes, either directly or through your foundation. So can you pick up on what Bill said as to the appropriate markets versus philanthropy mix when it comes to addressing the climate crisis?
I'm so glad that Bill made that clear. In other words, I think we have to be very, very practical. Markets, profit makes the world go round. And if you're going to try to engineer financially, this is a very important financial engineering exercise, what's going to happen to produce the money, the over $5 trillion that's going to be needed, you have to look at who has the money and what are the motivations of those people. So if we deal with organizations, Bill said it very well, philanthropy is really tiny in the scope of this. And we look at national development banks, their total value is about $2 trillion, and they have many other obligations to take it, so they can't operate in a big way. The biggest source of money, those who have the most money, are institutional investors, about $200 trillion. But they have to take care of their populations. They, like any of us who have those populations that they need to take care of in various ways, that's all that incentive. And it's only 0.3% of that money is going into climate-related investments. So nothing. And why is that? They would like to invest. They are eager to invest. But they have to be able to make profits on that. Otherwise, it's philanthropic. In a sense, it's giving those resources away from those that they also have to take care of. So the answer really is in making profits, economic profits. They don't have to be outlandish profits. But what Bill is experiencing is, in doing the breakthrough energy, he's experiencing both philanthropy and also the economics of investing. And he and others like that will have a great opportunity. So we need to think about the investments. And those investments can range from venture, like I'm very, very excited to be a venture investor in entities where there's this incredible creativity that is emerging, to be able to come up with not only new technologies that are revolutionary, but even established technologies that will have big effects. We could talk about the list of those things, but there's a big list of those things. But I think we still also have to recognize that there won't be enough money to achieve that, because we're operating in a world that has many demands for enough money. And so that we're also going to have to deal with adaptation, to think about putting money into adaptation if those dreams don't happen. But I do believe that we have to understand that money goes around by the incentive related to those who have a financial incentive. So we have to work on this capitalism of that sort in order to achieve those goals. Otherwise, you're not going to get enough money, nearly enough money.
So turning to philanthropy in action, Dr. Precious, part of your foundation's work has focused on research and innovation in sectors like renewable energy and climate change. So for example, you've sponsored the Motsepe Presidential Research Accelerator Fund for Africa. Could you talk to us about some of the challenges and outcomes of your work?
Thank you very much. As a family, we started our family foundation in South Africa. In Africa, we work globally, and our mission has always been to reduce levels of poverty, particularly in poor rural communities in South Africa, on the continent, and globally, to contribute towards that. And the partnerships that we have globally, and you mentioned this, the Presidential Research Fund that we have with Harvard, that is to make sure that where research comes out, and we know that universities are important sources of knowledge and research. When you have the best minds at a global level, like Harvard, doing research, we wanted to make sure that that research is also informed by our local context. So bringing in an African perspective to global research is very important. And I'll give you an example. I'm also trained as a medical doctor, and we used to discover that a lot of the equipment, medical equipment that was donated to Africa in good faith, ended up not being utilized because it never took our local context into consideration. So you ended up with these huge amounts of medical equipment that ended up in what we call a graveyard of medical equipment. So in order for us to work with, ensure that Africans and other poorer communities have access to the latest innovations, technology that was put together by the best minds, scientists all over the world, we would like and we want to make sure that the African context is always taken into consideration. And an example of what comes out of the Research Accelerator Fund from Harvard is the work that was done by and I'm excited to say, a female researcher at Harvard who discovered that they used satellites in Madagascar, and they could foretell where micronutrient deficiencies would happen going forward. So that eliminated the need for blood tests and expensive blood tests and fast-tracked the ability for interventions to take place. So such work is so important, not only for local context, but also for global application.
Well, thank you. And Abdulaziz, your foundation places a considerable emphasis on youth engagement and education. Can you give us some insight into why you've targeted this demographic and what you think young people can do to help save the climate crisis?
Well, when my father decided how he wanted to spend his philanthropy, he thought education and only for youth is the future for our region here. So in the last 9 years now, we've been spending, first is giving bright Arab students to send them to best schools around the world. And in the last few years, we have also decided now, once we have reached that, we now need to shift, making not an impact on individual, but we want to make an impact on the education system in the Arab world. So now we start working with government entity, university, Ministry of Education, everybody else who touch the education, try to enhance the teaching experience to these, to ultimately to the students. And it's been very difficult. It was very easy to give scholarship, but to have impact and influence ministers who, demand, and he doesn't understand because we work hard for our money and we want to make sure the money is well spent. And slowly, we have been perceived, and we persisted for KPIs, which some of the government entities don't want to accept. I say, I can give you resources provided I can see some key performance indicators. So now people take us seriously. Now people, university and government and minister across the Arab world are seeking our help because we can, as Bill said, we can invest in new tools of how to make learning accessible to all Arabs in the region, Arab students. I mean, our biggest project was how we can take university to have them online. I remember we have started this 8 years ago, and all universities says, no way we can offer this online courses to our students. And until now, we have 11 universities are working, some already issuing classes and degrees in online education. And now a lot of these universities are going. So we didn't stop there. We found that also having students outcome from the university graduate, we have a lot of, particularly in our region, students who have graduated, but they don't have the right skill. So now we're also working on how to ensure those students who have graduated, they do have the right skill. So we are reskilling and retooling all students who graduated because they could not find job, because the work environment demands certain skill which they don't teach them at the university. So now we go back to university. Why don't you make this part of your curriculum so when the students graduate, have all the skill, and he can be immediately employed.
So we've just heard about the importance of education. One of your focuses, Bill, is innovation. You're one of the leading funders of potentially transformative climate tech through Breakthrough Energy. Can you describe Breakthrough Energy and its evolution over time?
Yeah, so I started learning about climate around the year 2000 because I was going to Africa and seeing farmers talking about their harvest failing and that was an increasing problem because of these variance in precipitation and high temperatures. And that made me think, okay, how bad is climate going to be for these countries that we're trying to uplift? Obviously, if you get up to temperate zone where you have, air conditioning and lots of wealth, you can do fire detection. You can deal with sea level rise. It's not, a major economic impact. But for that subsistence farmer, when the crop fails, they don't have food for their kids. They get malnourished, and it's the malnourished kids who are at risk of dying. And even for the kids who survive, they never develop physically or mentally. So as I looked into climate, I said, okay, how do we get the private sector engaged on this? What do we need in terms of carbon taxes or an R&D money? And in fact, at that time, all the way up to 2015, the R&D budgets of the rich countries were not going up to tackle these things. Now they're going up somewhat, but that upfront funding very risky stuff, often philanthropic capital is the best way. We have 90 what we call Breakthrough Energy Fellows whose ideas were so early that they needed close to $1 million to prove things out. And then, if it succeeded, then the high-risk venture capital would come in and fund those companies. What might surprise you is that it's not just that front end, the fellows piece, where we sometimes need philanthropic capital. As we get projects that are working at the lab, and then we need to do early scale out, we also need some philanthropic capital there, and that's a group we call B Catalyst, where we've raised several billion with private sector partners. And we even had e-methanol announcement with the EU and a long-duration storage announcement with the EU yesterday that uses those catalyst-type dollars. So it's, policy work, policy facilitation, open science, advocacy. Those are the areas where, as climate philanthropy is increasing, we have an organization called Climate Leadership Initiative that helps advise philanthropists, okay, what are these different vehicles? What are you likely to get out of them? And so it has become a key element, although the dollar sign next to it is nowhere near these big numbers, that once you get rid of the green premium, once you have innovated enough, then markets come in and the natural scale up can take place.
So, Ray, we saw in the intro that one of your passions is the oceans, and OceanX is an initiative that actively explores the oceans to further discovery and awareness. Can you tell us how you came to this, what you've learned, and what this tells us about how philanthropy can be leveraged to address the climate crisis?
Well, I'd be happy to do that, but I'm just going to make the point that I think that what Bill is doing, which is he described very well, and it's bringing together the philanthropic, the double bottom line power is a model and has to be followed. And I think that we're at the tip of the iceberg. I think that if we're starting to look at what the exciting new technologies are and the economics of those technologies, that they are becoming great investments. And that path in terms of supporting those investments, the way Bill is and the way others can do, is going to be able to attract some of that $200 billion, which is in the form of institutional investors. I believe that that's going to be the greatest force to being able to actually bring in money, serious money, and make this thing go as well as it possibly can. So I just want to not only congratulate Bill, thank Bill, but also ask people to pay attention to that type of an approach, because I think that that's going to be critical. Thank you. I'm passionate about the ocean, exploring the ocean for emotional reasons that then became intellectual reasons. When I was growing up, I watched Jacques Cousteau, and I learned how to dive when I was in my 20s, and then I had the opportunity to go with scientists on an ocean exploration vehicle. I bought one of those to support the scientists and to tag along, and then my son was involved with National Geographic, and Jim Cameron, the great filmmaker, is passionate about discovery. He said, show what's going on there, because the ocean is our greatest natural resource, right? It is 72% of the world's surface. And on land, the highest point is Mount Everest, is equal to the deepest depth. So imagine it's more than twice the size of all continents combined, and it's virtually totally undiscovered. And then in terms of climate and its impact, it's enormous. I can go on and on at length, but it absorbs 90% of the heat. It is 23% of the carbon that mankind is producing in its various ways. And it's then having current changes that are having big effects on climate. Anyway, I can go on and on. So for me, I wanted to create the best ocean exploration vehicle that also combined that with media so that people could see that. And so that's what it is. We've discovered the giant squid and its habitat and so on, and we're working all over. We'll be going to Indonesia, for example, which has the greatest underwater biodiversity, because they don't know even what's there, and it's time to have a plan, because then there's issues like global mining and underwater mining and so on. So that's a passion, and then we do it in partnership with countries or in partnership with philanthropists to have that kind of an impact. I would say the ocean, pay attention to the ocean, because it is the most important, and it is yet the most neglected important thing, I think.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to close out with a question for each of you while keeping the 10-minute mark in mind. Dr. Precious, as we look forward, take a more forward-looking approach on Africa. Hard hit by climate impact, experiencing economic and demographic growth. How does this growth continue in the context of sustainable development?
Thank you for that question. The African continent, we know, is one of the most populous continents globally and is growing at a very rapid pace. We are blessed with a youthful population, which require that we do certain things to ensure that they become a demographic dividend, that we can reap the demographic dividend. And there's several things that we need to do. We have to give hope to this young generation, and at the same time, we have to ensure that the UN Sustainable Development Goals in their totality are achieved, within the set time. I think what is important for us is, as we move forward, to make sure that we adhere and commit to very reasonable, inclusive transitions within the mix of reliable energy that is available. I mean, we have 600 million people on the continent that do not have electricity. And one of the reasons why we support Bill's breakthrough energy venture is because we realize that besides, of course, Bill being Bill, you support him when he does something. We realize that this is an opportunity for us to be part of bringing forward technologies, breakthrough technologies that will enable us to electrify the continent and other parts of the world rapidly at scale, feed our population, ensure that we bring in women into the fold. Women and youth are very important in ensuring that we move forward and develop the continent. I'm very excited to hear the work that you do in education, because I believe that's also a very critical path for us. And it's important that as we move forward with breakthrough energies and other things that people are doing in innovating for the future, we educate our youth to follow the path of sectors that are growing, and green technology is one of them. So we have to make sure that universities, teaching institutions are aligned with what's happening in the private sector, in business, and we educate young people to ensure that we do not have this huge gap with graduates who cannot find jobs, which is the case in my country.
So thank you for that. Abdulaziz, you're one of the region's most prominent philanthropists, but also operate at the highest levels of business and finance. How do we catalyze more philanthropy in MENA, and how do we get these discussions in the corporate boardroom more? In 2 minutes.
I think, by creating more awareness across. I mean, it's great to have COP28 here in the UAE. Now, I think the whole region will be discussing issues on climate change. So, so the goal will be cascaded from let's say, from COP28 to each country. Each country would have goals to do. Now, we need also corporate institutions to listen. But sometimes we, as Bill said, we run for business and we want to make money. And sometimes we don't listen. We put priority to make money as a priority and everything else secondary. But I think if we can educate our next generation, kids, that they put pressure on organization to demand what each organization is doing on climate change, I think, will be a very successful tool. We have pressure from COP28, and we have pressure from the consumer, and the kids will make a very successful model. So our program, Al Ghurair Foundation, is now we're going around and educating, train the trainer at each school, public school and private school, how critical it is to discuss climate change and how to make this part of the curriculum at each school, and be it grade 6 or grade 12 at school, they should be talking about it. They should change behavior. They should lifestyle to start discussing this. I think that's what we are, because 60% of our population are below 30 years old. So if we can put the pressure from the bottom, and will force the corporation to behave and start to really first set what are their climate change goals and how the board is doing it. I mean, sometimes you have corporations have no knowledge of what's the climate change goals. So we have to educate the boards, and we have make also transparency, set goal and transparency and report, and maybe incentivize the management if we really need to have incentivize them for reaching some of these goals. Maybe we can, maybe we can succeed in achieving some of these great goals we set here today.
And Bill, I'll talk to that. Bill, what would you like to see climate philanthropists doing more of?
Well, I'm very excited that both types of capital, purely philanthropic capital, which has a unique role, and so-called double bottom line capital, which are things like the money raised for Breakthrough Energy Ventures, that I see both of those growing. And I get a lot of pleasure talking to people who are thinking about their philanthropy. Philanthropy should be fun. Gates Foundation would love to help any new philanthropists in their journey. For people who are interested, we have a thing called the Giving Pledge, which also gets philanthropists talking about what's working, how we do better. For climate, some of the innovation, some of the policy, some of the open source science, the only way that will get done is philanthropy. There's a lot of climate philanthropists, and so it's great that we sit and talk together and make sure, okay, who's covering this? Who should work together? People have a different mix of things that they specialize in, but we need this to be a community. So we're taking what are incredibly precious dollars, the pure philanthropy dollars, and using those in the best way possible.
And Ray, I'd like to close with you. What's the sustainability behavior you're hoping to change this year?
I think everything comes down with how people are with each other. In other words, the great dilemma that we face is the greater good, that there's a commonality of what is good for the world, and then there is what is good for us individually or our families and the organizations. And so when we're dealing with things like politics and that, we can lose sight of achieving the necessary greater good for the community relative to the individual goods. So I think we have an enormous amount of resources, enormous amount of brilliance, and if we could do it rather than a highly polarized way, do it in a highly coordinated I think it's like politics. You watch the politics, the destructions. I think, having that togetherness, that greater good, I think it's all going to come down to how we are with each other.